Good afternoon. I'm Mark Allen with Gaper.io, and I'm here today with Dylan Wheeler, the CTO of EcoText. Good afternoon, Dylan.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for joining us today. So can you share a brief background of yourself and your work experience?
Yeah, of course. So I was born and raised in New Hampshire. I'm just graduating the University of New Hampshire now with degrees in information technology and philosophy. I'm working pretty much full-time on EcoText, which is my startup. And we've really been interested in innovating in the space of education. It's sort of this area that historically has been very slow to change, and we think it's ready for disruption. So we all know about the student debt problem in this country, and there's a lot of factors involved, and a lot of them little people like me can't do much about it. But that's why we kind of thought we would tackle the out-of-pocket costs associated with textbooks, because that seemed like a pretty easy win in that regard.
Cool. And it sounds like even though you're a startup, you are doing something about it, which is great. I love it that young people are getting involved in so many things that benefit society.
Yes. So it's all about.
Yep. So what has been your experience with remote employment, and both of the remote employee and the remote employer?
Yeah, certainly been a little challenging, but given the nature of our startup, it's something we're familiar with. We've got a full team of about 7 people, and 2 of them are out of New Hampshire. So most of our team meetings have been virtual and have been remote. We've used Google Hangouts and Zoom and all kinds of stuff like that. So it's certainly something that we're familiar with, but we're not expecting that it would be making us fully virtual as it has. And that's definitely brought some challenges, but I think we've been pretty good to use the technologies we have, and both teleconferencing like Zoom, but also like instant messaging like Slack and stuff like that.
Cool. So you mentioned some challenges, and I'm assuming some challenges you didn't quite expect with the pandemic. Can you elaborate on that a little?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, when you go online, it's very hard to have those special in-person meetings where you can really write stuff on the whiteboard, collaborate in real time, throw stuff around the room, and it's you can connect on a lot of levels as far as a team goes, and being able to make crucial team decisions. It tends to go easier in person, and it tends to feel a little bit more natural in person. And so definitely bringing that virtual is very challenging, in the sense that it's easier that we can get attendance because we're all working from home. But it's a little harder, I think, to keep everybody's mind in it, just with the nature of having at-home distractions. Yeah,
obviously, yeah. So that really leads right into the next question. What do you think is the future of remote employment, and what do you think can be done differently to make it more effective?
Yeah, no, that's such a great question. And certainly, I think when this pandemic is over, I think we're going to see that a lot more work is done virtually, maybe than compared to before, which I think has a lot of benefits. But certainly some of the challenges, it's going to be tough to replace that just ability to actually look at somebody and see them and interact with them in a physical space. But I think that this is something that was probably inevitable, and so now that it's here, I think we can do our part to try to learn as much as we can from it, and to be prepared for a virtual space, in case this ever happens again.
Yeah, I actually think the pandemic accelerated this about 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, especially I'm in San Francisco. The traffic here is just so bad. I know you're in New Hampshire. It's probably not as bad there.
Yes, I've heard California is very notorious for new traffic.
Well, it's interesting that, just a little side note, a week before California went into lockdown, Google, Apple, and Facebook all told their employees to work from home. And there was a noticeable difference in the traffic that week. Everyone was like,
really?
Stay home every day. Yeah, because that's tens of thousands of people that are off the roads.
Right. Yeah, that's such a good point.
So, I think even from ecological reasons, that I think this is going to become more popular.
Right. Yeah, we've seen a pause in production all over the world, and CO2 levels are, certainly being emitted less often as they used to be. So, yeah, there's definitely some interesting side consequences that come from this.
Yes. So, what is the story behind EcoText, and what's the journey been like?
Yeah, sure. The story was essentially a group of us. We were all in college together. All of us went to the University of New Hampshire, and got to that time in the semester where we had to foot the bill for the $300 engineering book that we were going to have to pay for. And it sucks. And it's the same story that you hear with all students. It's hard. First of all, it's expensive, but even regarding disregarding that, it's an out of pocket expectation. So students, work all summer, busting tables or whatever they can, get their hands on for a job. And then instantly, a huge chunk of that has to go away toward out-of-pocket textbook costs just for this class that you have to take anyway.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way you can apply financial aid or loans or scholarships or any of that to that. And we really thought that was a big problem. So we came together and said, how can we reduce these costs? The first being, make them digital for a lot of reasons, a lot of ecological reasons too. But yeah, now we're sort of at this point where as we're digitalizing these books, we're trying to think, how can we bring more value to the student, to the professor, to the university, and try to help measure student success and engagement in ways that we never really could before with a physical book. So the journey has been long and very windy and twisty, and there's a lot of big players, big publishers in the area. So the market is changing, almost every day. But we're a small, scrappy startup, and we're willing to adapt, and we have adapted a few times. But I mean, the journey has been pretty crazy. UNH specifically has a lot of resources for startups. So it seems like a very interesting place to come together and make a startup. Little old New Hampshire, but it turned out that we were very fortunate to have fallen into a lot of really good resources here.
Cool. So you mentioned the professors. So I would think that they would be a group that might not be open to this because they do derive income from the selling of their textbooks. What has their reaction been like?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, and that's something we get asked a lot. And really, we're seeing a sort of this shift in the way supplemental course material is delivered. Certainly, traditionally, most of it came from big publishing houses. A lot of those authors were professors. But what we're seeing now is almost a shift toward open access resources, or they call them OER. And the idea behind these types of open source public knowledge is that we want education and learning to be as open and free as possible, so we can have an educated society. And so a lot of the benefits of open sourcing these materials is that people like us can pretty easily adapt them for our platform as well. So we're working heavily on these type of open sourcing initiatives, but obviously we have to accommodate the books that are in our library as well. And we actually have a pretty good revenue sharing model where we make sure that the publishers are paid first and foremost, because they're the ones responsible for producing this great content. And then the universities also get a bit of a kickback, because our goal is to not put people out of business because you can no longer sell physical books. We want to help try to encourage this transition to a greener future in that regard.
That's great. And I can see it makes sense. It sounds like it's almost the original thing, the open source. I mean, it's similar to open source software, I would think, right?
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. It seems counterintuitive. I mean, in our society, intellectual property goes a long way. You can get a lot of money for keeping trade secrets and all that stuff. But what we found is kind of almost contradictory. If you have something that's open and free, it encourages a very wide variety of people to form as a community and contribute to it. And you get diverse people contributing on projects, you get diverse ideas, and in theory, a more holistic view on that particular issue. So yeah, I'm personally very excited to see where this open access area goes. And I think it will be largely the future of education.
Yeah, and actually, as you're describing it, I'm surprised no one thought of it before this. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. And that was kind of one of our growing pains too when we first got started. Was why isn't anybody else doing this? And so we've been looking around to try to see why is what we're doing just so bad that every company that tries fails, or is there just an angle that maybe people haven't seen before? And that's really what we're in the thick of right now.
Cool. So finally, there's companies like Gaper that help develop, build, and scale products, especially for startups like yourself. So, and you're small, you're 7 people, but eventually you're going to have to grow beyond that. So how important do you think it is in the startup world for companies like yourself who need to hire people quickly and people that have, the skills that you need?
Yeah, no, it's certainly very important. We're getting ready for version 3 launch of our product to get into schools this fall. And we're, as part of that, we're reaching out. We're contacting a few development shops that we know of, but it's a very disconnected process, and you go largely on word of recommendation. And you're trying to have all these conversations with people, and it's very slow. And I think having a direct channel to this top talent, especially in times of hardship, is super important. Again, when you're virtual and you can't even have these in-person interviews, it definitely helps to have some of that infrastructure in place.
Yeah. Well, Dylan, I love your idea, the idea behind EcoText, and I hope you get connected with every university in the US and the world, for that matter. I think it's a great idea. It's got so many great benefits, and I want to thank you for your time today.